Okay. So I noticed that the building here is not only the Ministry of Education, but it's also Culture and Sport. So actually the next paper is quite appropriate. And particularly given this time of year and given this country and this city, it seems incredibly appropriate. Okay, so I'm going to start. However, this is a paper about education. It's a paper about students and student effort and student focus. The football is merely instrumental in helping us to address this question. So again, the question is, how much does student effort matter? By the time the student arrives at age 16 to take this exam, most of the things that are relevant are already set. Their cognitive ability, their non-cognitive skills, their genetic makeup, their family income, the teaching quality they've had throughout their lives, all of those things are given by the time you enter the classroom with your pen and take the exam. Or slightly taking it back a little bit, when you start the final year of your course, so much that matters has already happened. So the question is there anything still up for grabs? Is there anything that can still actually be changed by the student trying hard? Can the student offset ineffective teaching by working hard? Can the student offset coming from a poorer background with fewer books in the home, fewer educational trips and less support from their parents? Can you say, okay, I'm going to leave all that to one side and really work hard? Can you turn things around? Okay. So relative to all of the other things that we know about education, we know hardly anything about the importance of student effort, which is the one thing that's left to change, really. So I think it's interesting to ask, well, why? Why do we not know this? Why is it hard to find out? It's very straightforward, I would guess, to look at a correlation between, whether kids complete their homework and how they do in their exams, or how often they are absent from school and how they do in their exams. But the problem is that those things are correlations. They're not telling you anything about causation. Probably kids from nice, comfortable, well-off, middle-class backgrounds will do well in exams and will do their homework. They will do well in exams and they will go to school. So there's a very strong correlation there, but it's not telling you anything about the importance of doing your homework or the importance of attending school. If you want to try and get a causal relationship, you need something that impinges upon the student or the student and their family from outside. Okay, and ideally what you want to do is to have a situation where something changes the trade-off between studying and leisure. Okay, something that changes the value of leisure and makes you want to study more or less. Okay, that isn't coming from just your general family background. So that's what we're trying to do here. So we have a very sharp and an exogenous outside and a repeated change in the value of leisure, to try and see if we essentially imagine we're turning effort on and off, student effort on and off, what difference that makes to exam scores. So this treatment arises from a great piece of luck for us as researchers, but a terrible piece of luck for students in England, namely that the two major world football tournaments, the World Cup and the European Championship, overlap with the exams. So remember from my first talk, these GCSE exams, they're really, really important for the students, they're really important for the schools. They determine whether you get on, whether you can continue in education, whether you get a good job and so on. These overlap with this very distracting thing called the World Cup. Now, England, despite being not very good at football, is nevertheless very interested in football, and so there's a huge scope for being distracted. So what we're going to do, roughly speaking, and I'll come to the detail in a minute, is we're going to compare how students do in years when there is a World Cup and when there isn't. Okay, it's much more, I think, I hope, subtle and complicated than that, but roughly speaking, that's what we're going to try and do. So again, we're going to measure performance in terms of these GCSE exams, as we did before, and see what the difference is. So why do we care? There are two reasons, really. I guess for today, for here, the top one is the most important one, and it's kind of the question I've been asking. Is effort important for attainment? What is the impact of a substantial decline in effort? So the answer, I've actually given the answer there, which is 20% of a standard deviation. For groups of people who we guess make a, well, more than guess, who we estimate make a substantial reduction in their effort in these years, they see their performance decline by about 20% of a standard deviation. Okay, and who are these groups? Well, it won't be a surprise to you. They are male. They are generally poorer, from poorer families. And so we're not only reducing the average performance, we're making the biggest impact on the average performance of those who are scoring the least well in the first place. I think this, so this is always a fun paper to give because people quite like the idea of the technique, and also they get to smile at the England football team and, oh, what time did they go out of the tournament and all that. But it's actually quite an important point here, because effort is something that we can potentially change. We can't change people's genetics, we can't change much about their family income, family background. We're all trying to think of policies to change teacher effectiveness, but that's not very easy. But student effort, in principle, we can do something about. We can try and incentivize students to put more effort in, and maybe that will actually make a difference, and maybe that will be a good policy. I also think it's important because it helps us to understand some other results, I would argue. We know that there are school types that seem to get incredible results for their students. I'm thinking of the kind of no excuses schools in the United States, the Knowledge is Power program, which have an incredibly positive impact on the scores of their kids. Well, why is that? Maybe one of the reasons is that they either kind of enforce more effort through a fairly tough regime, or that they infuse and they create more effort through people wanting to belong to a school like that. So the local policy issue, local being England, okay, so if this is really dreadful, why don't we just change the exams a bit? We couldn't even persuade FIFA to hold the World Cup in England, so the chances of persuading them to change the timing of the whole thing are fairly low. So maybe we just change our exams. But I'm not going to really talk about that today. Okay, so let's get back to thinking, why is this hard? Why don't we know why effort is important? We need a causal study. This, I think, is a very good case for a causal study. The treatment is entirely random. If you are born in a year in which the summer exams take place in an even year, 1960, 1962, then you're going to suffer. If you were born in a year when you take the exams in an odd year, then you're not. So it's completely random. Okay, nobody can really affect the timing of the football or of the exams, so there's nothing anyone can do to kind of switch this around. So this is called an intention to treat study. So I don't know how, I can't peer into people's brains and think about how much of their time they're spending thinking about the tournament. I can't even find out how much time they spend watching the telly, listening to the radio, following it on the web, talking with their friends about it, reading the newspapers, any of those things. All I know is that the maximum potential treatment is immense. I'm sure it is in this country too, that all the media focus on very little else during this period. So if you wanted to immerse yourself in the tournament, you could, and you could spend all of your time doing that. On the other hand, of course, there are people who don't like football, and there are people for whom this is a wonderful time because all of their friends are taken away and they can just study and focus and get on with things. Okay? So I don't know how much each person is treated, how much effort they put into their work. All I'm going to do is I'm going to compare their exam scores in a way that I'll explain with whether the tournament was on or not. I haven't got a measure of effort, I haven't got a measure of focus on the tournament. I'm just going to compare whether the tournament is on or not and how well they do in exams. So I'm thinking there's going to be a massive amount of heterogeneity. There are people who live for football, there are people who hate it, and there's people all the way in between. Okay, so these exams always take place in May and June. We found the exam timetables for all of these exams. It's obviously straightforward to find the dates of the football tournament. Now, this is the best thing of all from a statistical point of view. The exams do not overlap completely with the tournament. Okay? Roughly speaking, half of the exams take place before the tournament, and half of the exams take place during the tournament. So this allows us to look within a student. Okay? So we can say, let's take a non-tournament year. Let's take an odd year, last year. No World Cup, no European Championship. Nothing going on in May and June at all. You take your exams spread out over about a month. It's quite hard, I mean, to keep going and keep doing exams through that period. And people react in different ways to having a long line of exams to do. Some people go at it really hard at the beginning, and then they get more and more tired. You know, they find it hard to write, they find it hard to think, and they sort of get worse and worse. Other people get better, they learn how to do it, they learn on the job, and they get better and better and better at exams as they're going through the period. Okay. Everybody's different. Everyone's going to respond to the difference between early exams and late exams in different ways. But I can look at you, and I can look at your exams, and I can see how you score for each individual in my 500,000 kids a year, and see how they score in the late exams relative to the early exams. And I can do that for every type of pupil: girl, boy, black, Asian, white, poor, not poor, high ability, low ability. And I can see in a non-tournament year how they do in their late years, the late exams relative to the early exams. Then I can essentially clone those people and look at them in the following year when there is a tournament. And again, I can see within a student, so within student variation, how they do in the early exams and how they do in the late exams. Okay, and then I can compare the distribution of late minus early differences within a student in a tournament year and a non-tournament year. Okay, so I can get within student variation, so I can look at a difference between late exams and early exams, okay, for every single student in my data set, and then I can compare that difference with the same late minus early difference in a tournament year. So that's what a difference in difference is. I'm saying, let's compare the late early difference in tournament years and non-tournament years and see if we can see anything there. So I'm convinced that this is a very strong identification strategy to try and get at the impact of the tournament on students' effort and focus. Okay. So it's a very, very simple, I mean, this doesn't even really need saying, to be honest, but let's do it anyway. What do we think is going on here? We're thinking about attainment, and your attainment depends on your effort, how much focus you're putting into this. So again, it's not, I'm thinking of effort very broadly. It's not just about how many hours you spend at your desk. It's about how many hours you spend at your desk thinking hard about your work, trying to ignore, you know, your family in front of the TV shouting and drinking beer downstairs, how you ignore your friends and say, no, I'm going to stay home and study. So it's focus, engagement, effort in a broad sense. Okay. So your attainment depends on your effort and on your ability. Okay. Why do we care about attainment? We care about attainment because it gets you qualifications and gets you higher income. And students are choosing their level of effort, and they're choosing it to balance the gain from future earnings against the cost of missing out on watching England win the World Cup. Thought there'd be a laugh there, but anyway. Maybe it's possible. Okay, so the cost of effort is basically time. Okay, you're spending more time studying, you're spending less time watching the tournament. This is going to vary between people. Also, the change in the value of leisure, the change in the time away from studying is going to vary between people. So again, we're expecting a lot of variability in terms of the impact of this. We're absolutely not assuming that everybody is interested and everybody's going to like football. We find some people actually do better in tournament years. Okay. And then the attainment technology, you know, again, ability and effort matter. And for reasons that we'll see later on, I want to emphasize that ability matters as well. And how you convert effort into grades is going to differ depending on whether you're high, medium or low ability later on. Okay, so the data, so you know about the tournaments, the the World Cup happens every 4 years. There are massive amounts of people watch it. There's huge amounts of interest. I'm sure you don't need convincing of that. And every other 4 years is the European Championship, which again, huge amounts of interest. Lots and lots of people watch it, lots and lots of hours of telly. But they are 4 years and they're every other 4 years. So every other year there's one on. Okay, so if just going through all the years, every even year there is a football tournament disrupting your summer exams, and every odd year there isn't. Okay, so we have, if you think of this as a policy, it's policy on, policy off, on, off, on, off. It just repeats. These are the dates that we're going to use. This covers 7 years, 4 tournament years. You can see on the right the timing of the tournament. One interesting thing in the did England qualify column is there's a no in 2008. So one question is, do we treat that as a tournament year for the students in England or not? And we chose not to, but we've compared because interest was much less, and we have the TV viewing data to show that. But we've also rerun the results counting it as a tournament year. And these are the exams. So you can see the examination dates, and again they start before the tournament and finish during the tournament. On the far right hand column you can see that roughly half of the exams take place during the tournament. So roughly half before, roughly half during. So this is for us the really nice feature that means that we can look at within student variation. Okay, so we look at my exam scores, how I did in the early ones before the tournament came on, and then relative to how I do in the late ones. Okay, I think I can move fairly quickly through this. It's the same data set, administrative data, 500,000 kids per cohort. We're using 7 cohorts, so we've got about 3.5 million students. We have lots of demographics, again, gender, ethnicity, whether you're eligible for free school meals, language, and prior test scores. Oop. This is how the attainment data works. Students are typically going to take 7, 8, 9 subjects. 3 of those are compulsory, English, Maths and Science. The others are choices, history, French, geography, whatever. We know the overall grade for each subject. So we know your mark in history. We know your mark in English or in Maths. Now subjects are assessed in different ways. Exams are important, but also coursework is important. We don't know the marks separately for exams and coursework. We only know the mark for each subject. So some of the marks towards your history grade will already have happened and been assessed before the summer exams and before any distractions are happening. Okay, so because we can only look at the impact of the tournament on the overall score, we are underestimating the impact on the outcomes during the tournament. Okay, so the numbers that you'll see are an underestimate of the effect. And again, we know the dates for each exam, so we can say, is this a subject whose exams fall during the tournament or before the tournament, but we don't know the mark for each individual exam, which is a shame. I think I've said all that. Pupil demographics, GCSE scores, we normalise. Okay, so you can see these are the around 3.5 million students. We're going to look at students who have both late and early subjects. Okay, if there are students who only take early exams, then we can't look at the within student variation. But thankfully most of the students do have both early and late. Around 12% are eligible for free school meals. English school students at this period are still overwhelmingly white. And we have prior attainment. Yeah, that's probably all we need to say about that. Okay, so in the paper there are several different levels of results. We look at just aggregate yearly data. We look at simple differences. What I'm going to show you is the difference in difference. So again, comparing the late, early difference between tournament and non-tournament years. That is the best identified, I think the unbiased estimator of what's going on. Okay, so if you ignore the top bullet, we're going to define late and early subjects. Late subjects are those in which at least 2/3 of the exams take place during the tournament. Okay, so again, we check, we try a half, we play around. And for non-tournament years, we use the same calendar dates that we've derived from the tournament years. So we look at this within student difference. And again, there's going to be a huge amount of variation. Some people will get tired and do worse in the late exams, others will do better and they will improve, others will be about the same. So the way this is going to work is, for any individual, let's say they are someone who gets better during the exam period. For a non-tournament year, if I compare their late and early exams, the only thing that I'm going to be left with is whether they are someone who gets tired or gets better, let's say. So everything about their prior attainment, their family background, their cognitive ability is wiped out because it's within student variation. So whether I'm a clever person or a less clever person, whether I'm supported at home or not supported at home, doesn't matter when I'm comparing my scores in exams in May and June. All that gets wiped out, and all I'm left with is, am I someone who tends to learn and get better at exams the more I take, or someone who gets tired? Okay. So then I'm going to clone that person, and then in the tournament years, look at the same thing again. So again, all I'm left with is whether I'm a gets better, get worse person, plus the effect of the tournament. So when I then compare the average early-late exam difference in non-tournament and tournament years, I'm just left with the effect of the tournament. Okay, that's what we're trying to do. So here's the first set of results. So what's going on here? This is the late-early difference. So positive numbers mean people get better as they take exams. Negative numbers means they do worse in the late than the early. Okay, and I'm comparing my 4 tournament years in blue and my 3 non-tournament years in red. And remember, this is 3.5 million students. Okay, so that's why it's a nice normal shape. 3 things to see. One is there is a huge amount of variation. Okay, there's some people are dramatically worse in late exams, some people are dramatically better, most people are about the same. Huge amount of variation. The second thing is that just about the average is positive, so just about most people get slightly better. The third thing, and the thing I guess I want you to focus on, is that in tournament years it's shifted left. Okay, so on tournament years this late-early difference is less, is lower, i.e. late is worse relative to early compared to non-tournament years. Okay, so that's the first suggestion here, that actually this tournament is having an effect. We can do a regression, we can look at this difference at an individual level. So again, I've got my 3 million students here for whom we've got a late early difference. And the top line is just looking at whether it's a tournament year or not. But I can also look at the type of student, okay, and see if this differs between people. And it clearly does. The top line is the impact on non-poor female students. We can add on another dose for male students. It's more negative for male students, and it's more negative for students from poor families. So I'll talk about the attainment in a moment. So we do all sorts of things statistically, and I'm confident that that's a good representation of what's going on. But let me spend a little bit more time on this table. This table's nothing fancy, no complicated statistical techniques here. These are just averages of numbers. So let me explain how it works. So we divide our population up into 12 groups: female and male, not poor, poor, and then the lowest quarter of prior attainment, middle half, highest quarter. And what these numbers are, for this group of students, high ability, non-poor females, this is the late early difference for all students of that type, the average late early difference in tournament years minus the average late early difference of this type of student for non-tournament years. Okay? All of these numbers are negative. So for all of these students, on average, the late is relatively lower in tournament years, i.e. during the tournament, than it is in non-tournament years. For all of those groups, it's negative. For some, it's more negative. It's always more negative for boys than girls. It's always more negative for poor than non-poor. But we have this interesting shape in terms of ability. There's two things going on here. One is, I don't have a measure of interest in football. We do know, however, that interest in football is socially graded, and it tends to be higher amongst poorer families and poorer low ability students. So I was expecting there to be a bigger impact on low ability students. But of course what you have to remember is that an hour less effort, an hour less time studying, is going to have a bigger impact on your grades if you're a high ability student than it is if you're a low ability student. If you're a really high performer and you take away an hour, that's a very, very valuable hour. You just watched Ecuador play something. If you're a low ability student, you're probably not losing a great deal. Okay, so you get a U-shape. You get a U-shape in terms of ability. But the main point is all of those numbers are negative. For all of these groups, this within student difference is lower in tournament years than non-tournament years. How am I doing for time? Or when am I supposed to stop?
No, you have 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Okay, we can do a little bit more because we have all of these observations. So we can look at students. Remember, trying to explain the methodology in terms of cloning students. So we can take students in terms of a very tightly defined set of demographics and each school. So there are around 2,500 secondary schools in England. And remember, we have all of the students in England, essentially. So we find students who are female, poor, low prior attainment, Asian, born in February, in a school, and we average their late early differences. Then we take the same group in the same school in the next year. So we're essentially, this is our best attempt at this kind of data, trying to get these clones, okay, to find people like you in tournament years and non-tournament years. So then we match them. So we end up with lots and lots and lots of groups. We have around 190 groups defined by gender times FSM status and so on, times 2,000 schools. So we have a lot of different groups, and so for each of those groups we can look at this late early difference in tournament years minus non-tournament years. And that's what this looks like. So I've just ranked these 190 groups, and then there's variation across all of the schools which that group is found in. So then I've ranked them according to this impact. So for example, this line here, I don't know what the group is, but for this group here, there obviously aren't all that many students because there's a wide variation in the outcome. On average, for this group, the late early difference between tournament and non-tournament years is around 10% of a standard deviation, but there are some who do better. So you can see that there are some very, very tightly defined groups where there's obviously a lot of students, and some much broader ones. But for almost all of these groups, they are negative. There are some at the right-hand side that are positive. And almost all of them that are significantly below zero are negative. So there is a massive amount of data here. Okay, so basically, I think we are reasonably confident that we've identified this correctly. I'm not going to talk about these now, but I'm happy to go back to do this. Lots of robustness checks. So in terms of quantifying the effect, there are different metrics. There's sort of the internationally comparable metric of effect sizes, or there's sort of the local GCSE grades that would be of interest to ministers in the UK. And then there's the average effect, and then there's the effect of a big reduction in effort. Okay, so taking people at the extreme of the distribution. Because remember, what I'm slightly interested in the impact of the tournament. But what I'm mostly interested in is how important is student effort. So what happens if you basically just shut down in May and June and watch the telly and don't do your studies? So I think it is legitimate to focus on people who are having a big reduction in effort, because that's what I'm interested in. How important is effort? I'm really not that interested in the football. So we also look at people who are at the extremes of the distribution, and there you can get 20% of a standard deviation. You can get really, really sizable impacts on attainment. So I'm just going to wind up now. That tells you what I've done, so I won't repeat that. So this is. I'll finish. Well, I'll maybe finish here. Student effort has a big effect on test scores. So I think there are 4 reasons why I think this really matters. Effort is manipulable in principle. In principle, we can do things to students to increase their effort. We can't do things to students to change almost any of the other parameters that might affect their attainment. But if we think their attainment really matters, there are policies that we can do that will affect their effort, and this paper shows therefore affect their attainment. Notice that these people are 15 years old. Okay, this is not early years. These are people whose attainment can be changed dramatically by something going on in their environment. Okay, so obviously early years are very important. I'm very happy to accept that. But here's a policy thing. Here's something that we can do that is going to have an impact on students well into their teens. I think, speculation, that some of the strong results in the no excuses schools in the US are probably due to effort as opposed to anything else. It may be that the longer school days, the longer school years, etc., the motivated teachers, I'm sure all those matter. But I would suggest that these results say that the fact that these kids are putting a lot more effort in also matters. And maybe effort matters directly, in the sense that if you engage with your education, then actually you can have an impact on your cognitive development and change your long-run outcomes. I'm just going to do a quick PS. So we're trying to do this. We are running a field study to incentivize students and incentivize effort, and we tried different incentives, both money and non-money, for very large scale, paid out large amounts of money. Still working through the results, but one day if you invite me back, I'll tell you how that worked. Okay, so let me finish. Let me just go back to the conclusion slide, and then I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Burgess. I don't know if someone wants to raise a question. I have 2 questions. The first one is related to the first paper. When you make a robustness checking, which you try to see which is the effect of the letter for maths and English, it seems that it has an impact on the first years, but then it loses the significance for the 3rd and 4th year. I don't know if you have like an explanation for such a result. It's one of the last slides you show us. And the second one is just a suggestion. I don't know if you have the country. It's more related to the second paper. If you have when a student is an immigrant, if you have the country, the origin country, because you may do a further robustness analysis to see whether the country has qualified for the World Cup, and try to see whether they have an impact. I guess that the effect on those immigrant students will be lower if their country has not qualified and it's only England who is playing.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the first question, I think it's simply that there are fewer observations as you move further and further out. So if you look at the columns of that table, the +3 and the +4 have got fewer observations. So I think the confidence intervals around the estimates probably overlap, but it's just that they're broader further out, because we have fewer schools that we can see that are +3 and +4. So I suspect that's it. In terms of the second point, yes, I mean I agree with you. I would have thought that would be important. So we did look to see whether students of different ethnicities had different reactions to the World Cup. So in particular, we have substantial numbers of ethnicities who generally care more about cricket than about football, from India, from Pakistan, Bangladesh. So I was expecting to see that they would have a smaller reaction to the World Cup than white British students. And there was a difference, but it wasn't significant. So, which is surprising. I don't really understand why. It may be that the ethnic minority students just hang out with their British friends. So it has the same impact, even though they're maybe not as interested. But I don't know. It's a puzzle. We also looked at different cities, because different cities have different levels of interest in football. So Manchester and Liverpool famously are much more interested in football than, say, Bristol is. But again, there didn't seem to be much there that was going on.
Simon, for coming again to Madrid. I think this has been a quite interesting paper. Student effort is something that has been maybe sometimes forgot here in Spain, and it's a very important issue to get to know the student achievement. So thank you so much for focusing on these two issues and for giving us such an interesting seminar. Thank you so much.
Okay.